Today at the National Press Club, Australian Industry Group Chief Executive Innes Willox. He's been the head of the National Employer Association since 2012 and will discuss proposed industrial relations changes and outline an alternative approach. Innes Willox at the National Press Club.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the National Press Club and the Westpac Address. My name is Laura Tingle, I'm the club's president. The Albanese government came to office with an industrial relations agenda which, at its essence, sought to recognise and address some of the problems that have arisen in the enterprise bargaining-based system of the last couple of decades. And, as part of that, to move the balance of power in the system back towards employees at a time when real wages have stagnated. It has a new round of reforms in train. Not everyone is happy about all of them. Australian Industry Group has traditionally been one of the more pragmatic voices amongst employer groups. Innes Willox is its Chief Executive. Please welcome him to speak to us today.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you to everyone for joining me today. Thank you for being here. It's a great privilege and honour to be speaking to the National Press Club, and I thank you for being here. To the many members of the Australian Industry Group, I'd just like to say to those who are here, thank you very much, and to those watching on television and online, thank you very much for your support in this debate, which is vital to our future nationally, as well as that of our workplaces. Today I'm talking about workplace relations from the perspective of thousands of Australian businesses who employ millions of Australians, about 80% of the Australian workforce of 14 million people. Australian employers, be they business owners or business leaders, are very concerned and agitated about the workplace measures that are now being considered by the federal government, and they are right to be so. They are deeply alarmed that what is hanging over their heads appears to be unnecessary, unproductive and conflict-inducing. Just like the multi-party bargaining measures that were passed by the Parliament last year, and I'll come back to those. Today I'm going to focus on 5 issues that are of concern to employers, where we are at with multi-party bargaining, proposals around same job and same pay, whatever that does mean, casual employment, the gig economy, and the suggested ability for unions to be able to wander around workplaces pretty much unimpeded. Firstly, I'd just like to take a minute to explain where our viewpoint comes from. My organisation has been an important voice at the table since its formation 150 years ago this year. We'll be celebrating that anniversary later this month with an event with both the Prime Minister and the Opposition Leader, our members and others. The Australian Industry Group has thousands of business members from across the economy in manufacturing, construction, transport, retail, energy and other utilities, the health and community care sector, the technology industry, mining services and the gig economy. Members use our services to make their workplaces safer and more productive, and in doing so they help make Australia and Australians become more prosperous. We have over 250 staff across the country, and they have thousands of conversations, hundreds of thousands of conversations with our members every year. They are employers big and small. We get instant feedback which informs our approach to good policy, including, of course, on the current state and the future state of our workplaces. On a personal note, I'm sure, like me, many of you started work at Woolies or in a local cafe and will remember clearly what it's like to work as a casual and get that first paycheck. My first real job was packing cans of pet food at the end of a production line. For extra money, I got the real pleasure of cleaning out the pet food making machine at the end of the week, on weekends. I can still smell it and taste it and see it to this day. But of course, I spent a long time working as a journalist in the Canberra Press Gallery, and perhaps that pet food factory was a good training ground for that. But it's always a great pleasure to be spending time at the Press Club, to be talking with you, and to also recognise the key role that the Press Club and our media play in fostering debate. So let's turn to what is being proposed by the federal government in these latest round of measures. I need to let you know that as part of the consultation process that we are very heavily engaged in, we have signed a confidentiality agreement with the federal government. So there's some detail that I can't go into today, and we're continuing those conversations with the government right now. We are committed to continuing to play a central role in the room, working through these issues and giving employers a voice at the table as decisions are made. However, a lot of what is being considered is already on the public record, and none of it on face value is of great merit or value for employers. I must say I strongly believe that we are having an impact at the table and during those consultations, but as always, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. I want to start with what could be done to improve things, to make us more productive and to create more jobs. That, after all, should be the focus of what we are trying to do here in terms of workplace reforms. One place to start is with the complexity of our workplace relations system. It is the world's most complicated by far. The Fair Work Act itself is over 1,200 pages long. Just as long as Tolstoy's War and Peace, but it's perhaps even harder to follow. There are more than 120 modern industry awards and occupational awards. Each are immensely detailed with over 1,000 different classifications and minimum wage rates. No other country has an award system like Australia's, or an award system at all. And given the complexity of that system for business, large and small, as well as for their employees, you can perhaps understand why. Our system is built on conflict, it is expensive, and it is bureaucratic. That's where we would start, working towards the goal of a simpler, more transparent workplace system. That's what we should aim for. The second point to make as the government embarks on what is potentially even more complexity and change is to ask a question. Why are we doing it? All we have heard so far as a rationale for the changes that are being proposed are slogans. Get wages moving, same job, same pay, close the loopholes. We deserve better. Changes to workplace laws need to be based on facts and research, not on political slogans and union claims. If you were to believe all the myths and legends that are being peddled as reasons for huge change, you would think that the Australian labour market is on the verge of collapse. Why else would you be doing it? But nothing could be further from the truth. AI Group is today releasing a detailed research paper which finds that employment growth has been strong since 1983 and particularly strong since 2015 until today, notwithstanding the pandemic. Workforce participation has risen strongly. In large part, this has been driven by a decisive and welcome increase in female participation in the workforce. Over the medium term, we find that wages have risen broadly in line with productivity. The link with productivity is the key here. The more productive we are, the more we can be sustainably compensated. That clear link to productivity is what is making these latest workplace proposals and the consultations around them more difficult. The word productivity is missing. No real demonstrated productivity benefit is ever given as a rationale for change. The research that we released today also shows that we do well in international comparisons of OECD plus nations in terms of wages, workforce participation and unemployment rates. There are strong opportunities in the current labour market for Australians to participate in the workforce. Those who are looking for work are comparatively successful and the pay they earn is relatively high. Only Iceland, with a population smaller than that of Canberra, fares better on each of the metrics. To burst another bubble, the slogan of record corporate profits is another nonsense. We are not seeing a business profit boom. We are not seeing a business profits boom. There is broad stability in the share of wages and profits in national incomes once the impact of surging global commodity prices is removed. Despite our relatively favourable standing internationally, I have to say there are red flags in our economic performance, and those are due to the closely related slowdowns in productivity growth and the pace of movement in real wages. In the pre-COVID years, productivity and real wage rates all but stalled. That left us highly vulnerable to the inflation surge which hit us from mid-2021. Again, that word, productivity. What has boosted average household income from wages is the surge in labour market participation, as I said, especially among women, and a strong growth in full-time employment. For many households, the growth in incomes during this surge in employment has been higher than the sudden increase in consumer prices over the past couple of years. But let's not understate the pain, and there is real pain out there. We have to acknowledge it and we have to try to treat it. Tens of thousands of households and businesses are going through right now enormous pain as inflation and the interest rate rises needed to curtail it take hold. And sadly, there is more pain to come as hundreds of thousands of mortgages roll into the new world over the coming months and energy, rents and other costs continue to rise. We all know it hurts, and it does hurt. The most recent erosion of real wage rates driven by inflation is not due, as some would argue, to the systematic failure of our labour arrangements. Rather, wage rates have recently lagged the sudden and unexpected price increases that we've seen because of the inherent inertia in annual wage setting and multi-year agreements. We all hope the recent signs of abating inflation are real, but sadly it needs to be reiterated that driving wages up with no productivity trade-offs will only increase all of our pain. But there is, underneath it all, a systemic problem. This is the sustained drop in productivity growth. I keep mentioning this word, productivity, but we need to address that to fix the associated slowdown in the growth of real wages. Even the Treasurer has acknowledged that Australia has a productivity problem. Look, it would be easy to throw up our hands and to say, look, it's all too hard. But if we don't raise our productivity through skills and training, infrastructure, taxation reform, workplace measures, and even more, to give us the tools to work smarter, not longer, and that's what productivity is, we risk missing our broader societal ambitions. Net zero by 2050 becomes more difficult, if not impossible. Building the houses for our increasing population becomes harder. The same with the infrastructure we need. Dealing with our ageing population becomes harder. Our government budgets are stuck in structural deficits disguised only by windfall commodity profits. Our geopolitics remains uncertain, and I could go on about the issues we face. But these are the reasons that we need to act quickly to reset ourselves in what is a rapidly changing world. Instead, here we are, spending time, precious time, talking about what is a misguided workplace agenda developed in 2021 in the lead up to the 2022 election. It was a strategy unfortunately driven by outdated union fixations and borrowed largely from unions in Europe and New Zealand. The world has, as we all know, fundamentally changed since then. Since then, COVID has deeply impacted businesses. Supply chains have been disrupted. Costs have risen. Labour shortages are rife, and there are more increases in energy prices in the pipeline. A 2021 election campaign plan is no good for our economy today and in the years ahead. It threatens to make the vital productivity growth we all need even harder to achieve. We fear that much of what is on the table is actually anti-productivity. Let's just have a look at the 5 key union objectives that the government is unfortunately looking to deliver one way or another. The government's workplace relations agenda is moving workplace relations laws, unfortunately, in entirely the wrong direction. There is one slogan that's been missing from the government's rhetoric, and that is, fix our lagging productivity. That word again, productivity, has hardly been mentioned as a desired outcome of the government's measures. It should not be forgotten that it was the Rudd government in 2009 that introduced the current laws. The Rudd Fair Work Act increased employee entitlements and union powers in over 100 different areas. The Act also put clear barriers in place to productivity improvements within enterprise agreements. Those same changes saw a shift away from enterprise bargaining and a move back to award reliance, those 120 awards that we now have. Since the Act was introduced 14 years ago, all the amendments that have been made to it have been directed at improving entitlements for workers, often to the detriment of productive and efficient business operations. The one substantial and positive change for businesses, which was reaffirming the common law definition of a casual employee, is now again under attack. Let's turn to multi-party bargaining laws that came into operation less than 2 months ago. When enterprise bargaining was introduced by another Labor government in the early 1990s, there was a welcome and big increase in productivity. At the time, it was widely and correctly recognised that the centralised wage fixing system of the day was a barrier to real wages growth and to productivity. Despite not raising the issue before the last election, the government has implemented a multi-party bargaining system that is inherently inconsistent with Australia's enterprise bargaining system. As we warned at the Jobs and Skills Summit last September, the new bargaining laws don't just apply to government-funded areas like aged care and the community services sector. The laws give unions the right to pursue multi-party agreements and take industrial action across whole industry sectors. The exemptions are very narrow. For example, in the building and construction sector, it does not apply, the exemptions do not apply to numerous workers who are critical on construction projects, such as electricians, plumbers, and air conditioning technicians and others. People say, but the world hasn't ended. It's still turning. The sky hasn't fallen in. But it's pretty obvious that given that the laws only came into effect in June, the productivity killing effects are yet to become apparent. The government and the unions perversely argue that the laws will boost productivity. They will boost productivity, they say, because they'll stop businesses competing on wages. They'll stop businesses competing on wages, raising wages. I'll leave you to think about that argument. But in any case, enterprise agreements are, at their heart, about much more than wages. There is no doubt that the multi-employer agreements that will be pursued by unions, and they will be pursued by unions, will contain a raft of highly restrictive provisions that will further inhibit productivity and to boost union powers. Many of the agreements will doubtless deliver millions of dollars to unions by requiring employers to contribute to worker entitlement funds like IncoLink and Protect that distribute regular and highly lucrative dividends to unions at the expense of workers. This is what is happening now under the pattern agreements that unions push through into the construction sector and the electrical contracting industry. There is no reason to believe that the new multi-party employer agreements will be any different. They won't be. The unions will hunt for a few accommodating employers who are prepared to reach multi-party agreements with them in return for a place on the union's list of preferred contractors. Once the agreement is in place, they will no doubt apply to the Fair Work Commission to rope in a large number of other employers against their will. Beyond small businesses, the permitted scope for employers to resist being roped in is very, very limited. And we will watch this unfold with dread over the coming months and years. It's nonsense for anyone to suggest that these laws are not going to be very bad for productivity. Let's turn to same job, same pay, another productivity killer. It is a policy that risks imposing unjustifiable and unfair requirements on industry. A consultation paper released by the Department of Workplace Relations indicates that the government seeks to address, and I quote, the limited circumstances in which host employers use labour hire to deliberately undercut the bargained wages and conditions set out in enterprise agreements made with their employees. However, that same paper also reveals a clear risk that the implementation will extend far beyond what this proposition suggests. Relevantly, the paper suggests that labour hire may be defined very broadly, potentially including arrangements that go well beyond what today is commonly seen as labour hire. The risk here is that it could capture a much, much wider range of service arrangements or relationships between businesses. AI Group is urging the government in the strongest possible terms to avoid such a deeply problematic approach. Beyond this, there is a raft of fundamental problems with the proposal. The department's consultation paper suggests that two jobs could be deemed to be the same job simply because an employee of a labour provider and an employee of a client business are classified at the same level. Such an approach would ignore the reality that classifications are typically broad in order to promote multi-skilling and work flexibility. Two employees covered by the same classification often perform very different jobs. Similarly, two employees in the same classification can have very different levels of experience and competency. The government has indicated, in effect, that its policy is not intended to require two employees with different levels of experience to be paid the same amount. And we hope that they will deliver on this intent. However, if its argument is that employees with different levels of experience will be in different classifications, this is not typically correct. For example, when a fitter completes an apprenticeship, they often have the same classification as a highly productive fitter with decades of experience. The junior, the more experienced, same classification. The government has also given no commitment that the two jobs to be compared would even need to be in the same location as to be captured by the policy. Further problems relate to the concept of same pay and how this will be calculated. The department's consultation paper suggests an approach that would require all pay elements to be taken into account. This would include, for example, all the allowances, all the penalty shift loadings and other amounts in an agreement. If adopted, this approach would visit an often entirely unworkable obligation on a labour hire provider to effectively apply the terms of their client's enterprise agreement to their own employees. The same job, same pay proposal is unfair to both businesses and to employees. It will kill productivity and it will remove the incentive for people to work hard, to increase their skills and to take home more pay. The policy is not supported by the facts. As acknowledged by the department's same job, same pay consultation paper, the ABS statistics show that labour hire workers represent only 2.3% of employed persons. 4 years ago, this figure was 2.7%. It's decreased. The policy is an unjustified attack on the labour hire sector and it will hurt many businesses and the workers who rely on it. No doubt because of all its flaws, which are obvious to all of us, the government has rebadged its same job, same pay policy as, quote, closing the labour hire loophole. There is no loophole or other labour hire problem that needs fixing. Let's now talk about casual employment and the proposed changes there. The government has recently made broad statements about its intent in this regard, but many of the key details are still to be fleshed out. So let's start with the facts relevant to whether any changes in this area are even warranted. Again, quoting the ABS, there are around 2.5 million casual employees in Australia. This equates to less than 20% of all workers if independent contractors, your sparky and your plumber, and owner-managers are included in the workforce. Looking just at employees, casuals comprise 22.2% of all employees in the workforce. This compares with 25% in 1998. The rate of casualisation has gone backwards. It is not growing. The claim that the Australian workforce is becoming increasingly casualised is clearly an outright myth, to put it politely. It appears that the government proposes to change the definition of a casual employee to reflect elements of the approach that were erroneously applied by the federal court in two very highly controversial decisions concerning a major employer workpack in 2018 and 2020. In proposing this change, it seeks to simply disregard that the High Court unanimously overturned the federal court's flawed approach that it did take in its judgment in August 2021. The federal court's approach was never the correct interpretation of the common law definition. It was unworkable and vastly different to the definition of casual employment that applied very widely prior to that time. In throwing out the federal court's approach, the High Court determined that prime consideration needs to be given to the intentions of the employer and the employee as seen in the terms of their employment contract. It is the contract which is paramount. Crucially, it also rejected the notion that a regular pattern of hours would be inherently inconsistent with casual employment. A return to the federal court's rather vague and uncertain approach would provide no certainty to employers or employees. A person could be engaged as a casual and paid a casual loading, but at some later stage be deemed not to be a casual, largely because that person worked a regular pattern of hours. This is the reason that prior to the High Court's decision and the amendments that were made to the Fair Work Act, employers were facing a risk of $39 billion in back pay, and were facing 8 different class actions. The definition of a casual employee that was inserted into the Fair Work Act in 2021 closely resembles the common law definition as articulated by the High Court. It is plainly absurd that the government would contemplate replacing this definition with one that reflects elements of the unworkable approach that was so roundly rejected by our High Court. Over recent days, the government has stated that the new definition would not be retrospective and that casuals would not be able to pursue back pay. It has indicated that employers will have a reasonable right to refuse conversion of a casual employee to permanent employment. Such assurances are welcome, and they are welcome, but there are still major questions about how precisely any change into the definition would operate in practice, and an obvious risk that the devil will be in the detail of any amendments. It always is. It is essential that any definition of a casual employee does not lead to employers once again becoming cannon fodder for class action lawyers and foreign litigation funding funds. Even if some of industry's concerns are addressed, and there are still many real questions as to why it is necessary to make it at all, we do need to understand the why. Why is this happening? The simple truth is that under the casual conversion provisions in the National Employment Standards, casual employees working regular hours have never had a stronger pathway to permanent employment than they do now. There has never been a stronger pathway. There is no compelling evidence that these provisions aren't operating effectively. This should come as no surprise. 2 test cases on casual employment heard by the Fair Work Commission and its predecessor, one in 2017 and one in 2020, concluded that large proportions of casuals work a regular pattern of hours and have no desire to become permanent employees, to make that conversion to permanent employment. Over the past 2 years, hundreds of thousands of casuals have been offered the opportunity to convert to permanent employment. Employer after employer has reported to us that very few employees take up that offer. In many cases, it is the employer who would prefer that the offer was accepted. The reason for such a low take-up of these offers is clear. Most casuals are happy with their work arrangements. They either do not want to lose the flexibility that casual employment offers, or lose a 25% wage loading, or both. So I ask again, what is the compelling case for change? And perhaps more importantly, what is the government risking by pursuing unjustified and unnecessary amendments? Casual employment often delivers a genuine win-win outcome for employees and employers. It offers flexibility to employees and flexibility to employers. A big risk is that the changes being considered will introduce unnecessary new barriers to the engagement of casual employees, or recreate uncertainty over who is a casual employee. This will only serve to reduce employer willingness to to offer casual employment opportunities in the first place. Such an outcome may well be welcomed by the union movement. Less opportunities for casuals, for our young people, for older people looking to come back to the workforce on their own terms. But it will hurt many employees who find it harder to find casual work. That will be the outcome. Let's turn to gig workers and independent contractors. This is another area where there is a serious risk of government overreach to the detriment of the Australian community. I want to talk about gig work and other independent contracting arrangements. It is important that any new regulations implemented for certain types of gig work do not extend beyond sensible light touch minimum standards. Any increased protections for gig workers should be crafted in a way that preserves that flexibility that gig workers and consumers greatly value. We all do. Numerous surveys show that most gig workers typically supplement their income with this form of work rather than it being their major job. My own dad was effectively a gig worker back in the day, driving a cab as a second job to get extra income for the family. The survey shows that most gig workers wish to remain independent contractors and have no desire to carry out that form of work as an employee. The unions are pushing for the government to implement heavy-handed excessive regulations. The union approach would cause major problems, not only for the gig businesses and the gig workers, but potentially for many other independent contracting arrangements in sectors such as transport and construction and professional services. Hundreds of thousands of fiercely independent electricians and plumbers and carpenters run their own businesses as independent contractors. They would no doubt be horrified, absolutely horrified, to learn that they have the prospect of being redefined as employees or subject to new government regulations that might discourage other businesses from hiring them. The government appears to be contemplating bringing back some version too of the discredited Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal that was at the time, a decade ago, threatening to destroy the livelihoods of thousands of owner-drivers before it was abolished in 2016. Those of you from Canberra should well remember the 200 truck blockade of the city in 2016 that was protesting against the tribunal and supporting its removal. We don't want to go back to that. The current uncertainty about the scope of the government's proposed amendments is bad for investment and bad for the many workers who must be worried that their opportunity to earn extra income can be disturbed. The government should please immediately rule out disturbing the accepted meaning of independent contractor as determined by the High Court. Our hard-working and battling Australian tradies risk having their lives and livelihoods turned upside down. One final government policy or suggested policy that I'll mention briefly is the proposal to expand the rights of union delegates and union officials. To expand the right of union delegates and union officials. Seriously? This is a free kick out of left field for the union movement and was never mentioned in the lead up to the last election. The role of union delegates is already protected under the Fair Work Act. Heavy penalties apply for anyone who takes adverse action against a union member or officer, including a delegate. There is no need for any new laws about union delegates' rights. Delegates' rights and entitlements should be dealt with at the enterprise level. There is also talk of the government amending the Fair Work Act to give unions the right to enter workplaces to inspect all wage records without the 24-hour notice that is currently required, including giving unions the rights to inspect the pay records of non-union members. More than 90% of non-government workers are not union members. They face the prospect of having unions combing through their personal records and pay details without any right of refusal. There is simply no case to trample on the rights of employers and non-union members by widening union rights of entry. So I'm just going to conclude with this. Why is all this happening? Why is it under consideration? Why are we talking about it? At its simplest, the government is seeking to implement and deliver on a union agenda. These measures are designed to grow union membership. That is their purpose. None of these measures are designed to improve productivity, jobs, the growth and the investments, which are the ingredients of a successful economy. Why attack gig workers, labour hire companies, tradies and other independent contractors, people who want to work in their own time and on their own terms? The answer is, of course, that commonly none of these groups have any real interest in joining unions. Be assured we will continue to work positively with the government and the unions in the interests of employers, their employees and the community, as we have been doing for the past 150 years. In doing so, we aim to achieve the best possible outcome for all Australians. That work will continue once we all see the final legislation, expected in a couple of weeks, I'd say, and as it then works its way through the Parliament. We owe Australian employers and all Australians nothing less. We all want productive workplaces, we all want well-paid jobs, and we all want successful businesses that contribute to a successful and prosperous Australia. Unfortunately, nothing that is being proposed in any of this will achieve any of those outcomes. Thank you for hearing me today. I look forward to taking questions.
Thanks, Innes. Let's go back to the underlying idea, productivity. You've said that a lot of things that the government's proposing are productivity killing, but the current system, I think everybody agrees, doesn't work. Enterprise bargaining system has become completely paralysed. The system doesn't work. So in the sort of more generous spirit of the Job Summit last year, what would you suggest that should be done to fix productivity now, particularly given that the growing area of the workforce is in the sort of the care economy, which is probably not, say, your traditional bailiwick, and also in that sort of general spirit of, I won't say kumbaya, but I just did, of tripartite agreement making and consultation, which sort of seem to feature in the government's agenda. Has any move been made to have three-way conversations in the same room between government, employers and unions?
Thanks, Laura. I'll take the second one first. The short answer is no, and that's deeply unfortunate. At no point yet, and there's still time, and we hope so, at no point yet has there been conversations with government, employer representatives and unions in the same room, to be able to look at each other in the eye and to work through problems, differences, difficulties, interpretations. And until you get that happening, you're going to create conditions for conflict out in the field. And that field will be in workplaces, it may end up being in the Fair Work Commission, it will be in the courts. We as an organisation are having really good conversations with the government at the moment. And as I said in my remarks, we think we've shifted the dial on a few things. And I think it's got to be really important that before this process is concluded, before the legislation finds its way into Parliament, there are serious conversations with all three parties in the room so we can work through the issues. Now, employers will have different areas of concern and unions will undoubtedly have different areas of concern. When I say that I think that we've made some progress on a few issues, it's more likely than not the unions will be deeply disappointed with what's been achieved, but we need to work it through. I would just take you back to when Julia Gillard introduced the Fair Work Act itself. She locked employers and unions away in a room for 2 weeks to work through the Act. Now, I've just said a lot of it is not perfect, but it solved a lot of problems at source. You know, it nipped problems in the bud before they became real problems. So on behalf of employers, I would just really urge the government, recognising that they have been much better this time around on consultation than they were last year over multi-party bargaining, which was a farce, quite frankly. This is much better this time, but the missing link is getting employers, employer representatives and unions together. If we're going to have true tripartism, as the government talks about, that's what tripartism is, getting us together. And we've seen it successfully happen in the past, but then everyone at least knows where they stand. You asked, what would we do to lift productivity? Productivity is many elements. It's not about us working harder, it's about us working smarter and more efficiently, about getting more bang for our buck. And that involves many different areas. It involves workplace measures, naturally, but it also involves taxation reform, energy reform, infrastructure reform, education, skills and training, all of them working together.
In the IR space in particular.
But these IR spaces, these IR proposals are working against that. Now, within the IR space, you made the point, Laura, that enterprise bargaining had slowed, if not collapsed. I'd say it had slowed. But why had it slowed? It had just become too difficult for both sides, technically too difficult. You were getting agreements knocked back because of wrong phone numbers on them. You were getting technical decisions made and making people go back to the drawing board. You were getting one or two people when there were agreements with thousands of people objecting, and therefore the whole agreement being thrown out. So we should go back to first principles and try to work out how to make enterprise bargaining work, because enterprise bargaining was the success. And where you'd start is making it less complex, taking out the technicalities and making sure that only one worker or one person can't object to an agreement where it's been agreed by thousands. They're starting points. You have to start to rebuild confidence in enterprise bargaining. Multi-party bargaining is just going to see employers being roped in against their will without any productivity offset. Where the productivity comes is at the enterprise level.
Poppy Johnson has a question.
Right. Thank you so much for your speech. With the next tranche of workplace reforms legislation due to be introduced soon, have you been in discussions with key crossbenchers and senators already? And can we expect your organisation to kick off a major public campaign in opposition when it lands?
Thanks, Poppy. Yes, we have been talking to crossbenchers. We've started conversations with them, but it's been not about the detail, because we are, we're involved in conversations with the government and the bill hasn't been settled as yet. But the crossbenchers are interested in the concepts, and we were talking with a crossbencher yesterday, one of the senior crossbenchers yesterday, just around, as I said, around concepts or the thinking behind, the rationale, the why. And the questions that were asked of us were, well, why is this happening? It doesn't look good to me why this would be happening, but is there any rationale for it? The point has also been made in regular conversations with crossbenchers, that the world is different to even less than 18 months ago when we held the election. So we all need to step very carefully through it. So in the end, this will be a parliamentary process. We expect the legislation will be introduced soon. Only the government knows when, but the indications are soon. And then it will go through the House of Representatives, go to a Senate. We hope there's a proper Senate inquiry. Last time on multi-party bargaining, we had a very truncated process where we were meant to put in submissions sort of the day after the inquiry was called, so you couldn't give any real thought to it. We hope it's a proper process, and we hope there's proper debate. Now, what Parliament decides, Parliament decides. That is the remit of Parliament. We'll do two things. If it's bad for employers, we'll make sure in the process through the Senate that people know our views and the impact on business, and that can come in many forms. Some might say it's a campaign, others would say just putting forward views and perspectives in a polite, coherent way. And then once whatever is introduced, we will work with employers to help them best manage that. That's our role as an organisation.
Phil Curry.
Hi, and it's Phil Curry from the Australian Financial Review. Just basically in continuation to Poppy's question, I remember back in 2007, John Howard rallied a bunch of industry and business groups to sort of help back in work choices. And under your predecessor, Heather Ridout, AI Group politely declined to join that campaign. And I think it sort of paid dividends subsequently for your group in terms of having a voice in the subsequent government. But I note on this occasion the campaign that was launched 2 months ago by about every group you can think of, from the farmers to the BCA, the builders, the AI Group was again conspicuously absent from that campaign against labour hire and so forth. Without risk of doubling up what Poppy asked, are you prepared to change that or join that campaign, or do you see the AI Group's role as being more valuable arguing and negotiating internally?
Thanks, Phil. Two things to answer that. You're right. Historically, we've never participated in advertising campaigns for a variety of reasons, but it's just not been the way we've operated, and we've sought to influence as from part of the discussions and the like. And we had a lot of internal conversations about how to approach this issue, and we decided that the same approach, broad approach, would take place. As long as we're able to influence government policy in its making, that's important to us. It gets real outcomes. Now, as I said, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating, and we'll see what the government ends up delivering. But once the legislation is in place, we will be talking to everyone, every man and their dog who wants to hear from us around aspects of the legislation, whether parts of it are positive or negative. We will be out there talking to them. We talk all the time with other business organisations. There are regular conversations around aspects of different areas. It's not just IR, it could be energy, it could be tax, it could be a whole lot of things. There are a lot of conversations that go on. That's not to say we all try to line up equally, but we try to sort of share information and perspectives, and that hasn't changed and won't change. The fact that there are a whole range of other industry associations in the room today tells you that we do talk and work closely. Advertising is not the way we do it, but we have other ways of doing it, which to influence, and we work really hard on seeking to maximise that influence.
Cheers.
Tom Lowry.
Hi, it's Tom Lowry from the ABC. Thanks for your speech. On an issue slightly separate to IR, Peter Dutton's been fiercely critical in recent weeks of some business leaders offering support and funding for the Yes campaign and the Voice referendum. He said, and I somewhat quote, CEOs are worried about influencers, the Twitter sphere, and over their customer base and employees. What do you make of those criticisms, and do businesses and business leaders have a right to take a position on social issues, and what's your advice to members considering doing so?
Thanks, Tom. This is always going to be a controversial issue because businesses have taken a range of views and perspectives on a variety of what you might call social issues over the years. I would say to you it's a business's right, if they make the determination that it's in the interests of their customers and their shareholders, to have a view. Some businesses do, and some prominent businesses do, but many businesses don't, and don't for a whole range of legitimate reasons. There's a disparity of view among customers, among suppliers, among staff, and so they just decide to stay out of it. But I don't think you can silence the voice of business when it comes to issues which they believe impact them. And businesses who stand up and take a view around social issues more broadly have obviously made a decision, whatever that issue may be, that they are impacted one way or the other. Now, you're always going to have a debate about what the role of a business is, but businesses contribute to society as a whole, and I think businesses have every right to put forward an argument as long as it's properly explained and understood and supported by shareholders, by customers and by staff. And that's for individual businesses to make that decision.
Thanks.
Sarah Ison.
Sarah Ison from The Australian. Just to stay on what you've called a controversial topic, which I'm very sure you're glad to definitely stick on, right? The AI group in May said, constitutional recognition was well overdue and that it's critical. But we have seen in recent weeks some different things happening. We've seen some decline in public support in some polls. We've also seen businesses like Big W ditching in-store announcements in support of The Voice. So different things happening there. Do you think corporate Australia needs to change its strategy or rethink its strategy when it comes to The Voice? And do you have any thoughts on the timing of this, if it should be delayed for as long as possible, December or so on, so that more businesses can get on board? What are your thoughts?
So, Sarah, I'll take the fifth on the second question, and I'll say that's totally in the remit of the Prime Minister. I think there had been an expectation that he might announce something this coming weekend at the Gama Festival, but has since indicated that he won't. But it's up to him and the government to work through the timing of the referendum. Look, yes, we said that recognition is overdue, but we haven't taken a position on the nub of The Voice. We take the view that of our broad membership, there are going to be a range of views and perspectives within that, and there are. But it's also, this is going to be a vote in the end that is decided by individuals, not by businesses. Now, Tom's question, should businesses have a role? If they think it's impacting, they should. But in the end, it's individuals who are going to determine this. What's important here is that individuals get the best information that they can to make a decision. And that's really important. And I chair the organisation which is doing all the in-language material for the Electoral Commission for migrant communities around the Voice referendum. But in the end, this is going to be determined by individuals. Within businesses, you're going to have a range of views. Within boardrooms, you're going to have a range of views. Let the individuals make it up.
Regarding your members, though, what are you hearing? As I said, Big W has seen some backlash. It changed its tack. Are you hearing from your members who are been in support for The Voice similar experiences? What can you share with us about what you're hearing?
Look, experiences vary. I've got to say, amongst our membership, the great bulk have not expressed a view or publicly expressed a view, and they're happy not to express a view.
Thank you.
Nick Stewart.
I know, although you're not talking to the union movement, you're on the inside, so there are limits to what you can say. But the tenor of your speech today, I was wondering, how seriously are you concerned and worried about what is happening and what is likely to emerge from the legislation?
Well, Nick, we'll see what emerges. All we can do, and we, as I keep saying, we're in the room and there's a lot of technical detail being worked through. So what we've got at the moment, a range of high-level ideas, slogans, I would characterise them all, but underneath those is an enormous amount of detail that is being worked through by the department in consultation with a range of people. And I must say, the department people are here and you're doing a great job, Martin. But we just have to work this through. And as I said, we're also in with the Minister's office today. I hope that's not breaching confidentiality by saying we're talking to him today, but we are. About some of the key concerns that employers have had. So we've had a range of roundtables, dozens upon dozens of roundtables with members over the past few months on what is being proposed, what is being suggested. We've been collating their feedback. We've been feeding that into the process. We're really concerned that it will have an impact on our economic competitiveness and flexibility within our workplaces and our workforces to do the things that they need to do with their employees' support to improve their output and their productivity. That's why the impact around casuals is so important, because it is not a growing part of the workforce, but an important part. We're concerned about what it will do for workers not having that flexibility that they want as well. Same job, same pay. We're concerned about it taking away the ability for businesses to upsize and downsize as necessary through seasonal changes or work surges. So we're concerned about the rigidities that it will impose on workplaces that won't give us the room to move that we need to adapt to those challenges I sort of outlined. So this is part of the productivity equation, not the whole part, but it's a key part.
Paul Carp.
Paul Carp from The Guardian. Thanks for your speech, Ines. A lot of the policy challenges you mentioned, like ageing population, building houses and transition to net zero, are things that we're being held back because of labour and skills shortages, which could arguably be improved by increasing migration. Could I please ask, is it regrettable that there's been a demonisation of the increase in arrivals and net migration since the COVID border closures were lifted?
It's a good question, Paul. I think I wouldn't know demonisation, yes, by some. I think there's a misunderstanding. I think there's a misunderstanding of the positive impact that migration has on us as a community and as an economy. And post-COVID, you had a big build-up of people wanting to come to Australia for various reasons and in various guises, and we're working that through. All the expectations are that migration levels will return to what you might call more normal pre-COVID levels from about next year. This year's sort of an aberration in many ways. But migration and skilled migration is important to our workforces and our workplaces for a couple of reasons. We have over 400,000 unfilled jobs in our economy at the moment. I'm not saying that we should take in 400,000 migrants to fill those jobs. That's just an example of the scale of the problem that businesses are having at the moment. Skilled migrants move to regional centres where there are massive job shortages. Skilled migrants take roles that are highly technical that we don't have the skills or capability here for at the moment, and they teach and are able to pass on their skills and knowledge to others. We are a migration nation. Our success has been built on migration. And I'd just say to those who are resolutely opposed to migration, look at Japan. Its population has fallen by 800,000 this year as a result of not having a migration intake in the past. It is economically catastrophic if you want to cut off migration as a way to help build the economy, to grow skills, to grow productivity. So I think there's a lot of misunderstandings there, and some have demonised, and that's really, really unfortunate.
Ben Westcott.
Ben Westcott from Bloomberg. Thank you so much for your speech, Ines. Flagging productivity isn't just an Australia problem, it's a global problem, and as was pointed out by RBA Governor Philip Lowe in a recent speech in India. Let's say that tomorrow Prime Minister Ines Willox...
now you're talking.
Full of ideas of how to change Australia. What are the top 3 measures you would do to increase productivity in the country?
Okay, good question. And we've given a lot of thought to this. One is, well, I just go back to what I talked to today, is to not do things and to make the workplace relations system more transparent, simple and less complex. 2 is to have a really solid look at tax reform, both corporate, individual, the tax mix, the tax makeup, to provide us with the tax base that we need, but to also make it competitive. We're not competitive on corporate tax. We're among the highest income taxing countries in the world, maybe only second to Norway under some measurements. So tax reform, I hate to bring up the vexed subject of the GST, but have a look at that. And so you have a whole root and branch discussion on tax reform. And lamentably, that's been missing from the conversation for a decade or more. And I've got to say, we and others had a great session with Allegra Spender last week on tax reform. She's looking at that. Hopefully, Allegra can take that up and run, and others as well can run. So you've got to look at workplace relations reform, you've got to look at tax reform, and 3rd is skills and training, preparing for the future. We still have too many apprentices who don't complete. I think the record was about 2009, 62% of apprentices completed. Ever since then, it's been about half. We've got to get our TAFE system. Government's trying to do a lot more in TAFE. and congratulations to them for that, but we've got to find TAFE teachers, we've got to find TAFE equipment so people can learn. We've got to get the university sector better aligned with employers, better aligned with the vocational education training system so that we're producing the degrees that we need in the right numbers and right proportions, and we have the right mix of practical and theoretical. I could go on, but they're the first three I'd look at. But it's all interlinked, and you can't do one with it and then block the others. You've got to focus on them all together.
Thanks Mitch.
Our final question is from Julie Hare.
Hi, excuse me, Julie Hare from the Australian Financial Review. Thanks for your speech. Just while we're talking about schools and education, Michael Brennan, the outgoing Productivity Commissioner, made an observation last year that we have a productivity paradox, that never in history have we had such an educated population and yet productivity is at a standstill. Do you have any insights into that? And just a double bunger, just on women and participation in the workforce, it's known to be one of the few things that has actually given productivity a boost. Yeah. But we have, on July 1, there was a new regime for childcare subsidies, which means that families with $360,000 a year can now get $30,000 in subsidies. Is that a good spending of public money, or is it middle-class welfare?
So I'll take the second one first around childcare. Childcare, workable childcare, is an essential part of a workable workforce participation system. Without childcare, you're not going to get participation at the levels you need, either male or female, because males are happily increasingly spending more time with their kids. So childcare is crucial. There's many ways you could do it, tax offsets and the like. I don't want to open a new sort of vortex here, but $360,000 is a lot of money. But there's an argument now about what is a wealthy household in the current environment. I'm not going to give you a number, but that's the conversation that takes place now around dinner tables, and people who earn a bit more are also saying, oh, it's tough at the moment. But look, I'm not going to get into a number. On the productivity paradox, it's a fantastic question, and it is a true and correct view that Michael Brennan put forward. We are more educated than others, and it goes back to my answer to Ben's question. What are we educating people in and for? And it may be that we are more educated, but we're not educated in the right things and in the right areas. We have a deficit of 11,000 engineering graduates a year. I'm not saying everyone has to go off and be an engineer, but how do we fix that problem? So the question I'd be is, and there are a lot of employers in the room. Employers always constantly say to me, Julie, I take somebody in as a graduate and I don't expect to get anything out of them in terms of productivity for about 2 years or so. We've got to fix that problem too when it comes to education, so that people can hit the ground running, can be job ready from the start. So it is the right outcome that we're more educated, but are we educated in the right things? That's the question. That goes to the productivity paradox.
Thank you.
Please join me thanking Ines Willox.
Thank you.